It was a big, big volunteer production
Yeah.
that ran the gamut of different skills that people had to have to do these things.
Yeah.
It wasn't just performances, it was getting the thing put together and supporting the people who were putting it together.
Yeah. It's one of the first things I heard from people from other parts of the state, people who knew of the lore of the living Christmas tree at Trinity Baptist Church. And it's just amazing to think about the ability to just amass volunteers in that way. And I can't think of very many churches at any time in history that have had the ability to just pull together volunteers in the way that Trinity Baptist Church did in the 80s and 90s. It's a real testament to what God was doing through it and the way God was working through all the performances and the people who came, the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people who came to these performances. And it's also a testament to the great leadership of people like Tommy Lyons and Buckner Fanning and many other church staff. Welcome to Fireside Chats here at Trinity Baptist Church. It's one of our new podcasts where we're using this podcast to talk about the 75-year history of Trinity Baptist Church, which we're celebrating here in 2024. This podcast series will look at different ministries and events that took place over the last 75 years, which have been meaningful to the spreading of the gospel message here in San Antonio and abroad. And today's podcast feature talks about the living Christmas tree, which in the history of Trinity Baptist Church took place over 2 decades. And so since this touches music and worship arts ministry, I'm here. I'm Jacob Sensenig, the music and worship arts pastor. My title recently changed, and so I had to make sure I got that right. Music and worship arts pastor. And Lane Mitchell is here with me. Lane is a long-term church member, has sung in the choir in the tenor section for many, many years. Is chair of trustees currently, and if there's another committee or team at Trinity, Lane's probably served on it somewhere over the years. And so thanks, Lane, for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. Good to be here.
Yeah. The living Christmas tree, it's a unique thing in the history of Christianity and Christian music. And so we're going to dig into it a little bit of what is a living Christmas tree. And I think that's the first question I want to ask, because if you didn't grow up in a really small subsect of this like Baptist evangelical megachurch world in the latter half of the 20th century, which is a really specific narrow window, you probably don't know what a living Christmas tree is, and you might not be able to imagine it, right? So we've got a couple images that we're going to pull up. We'll show if you're watching this on YouTube, and if you're listening to it on a podcast player, you might want to go to YouTube or Google living Christmas tree images or something like that, and you might find what you're looking for. But I'm going to throw a couple up here on the screen. And Lane, why don't you talk about what is a living Christmas tree?
Sure, Jacob. The living Christmas tree was 10 levels high, and it had, of course, a greater number of people on the bottom and one lonely lady at the top that put the angel's wings on. And all of the choir got up there, and we would memorize the music and sing from the tree and put on this performance. We had a guy that was in the choir that was worked for one of the local computer companies designing the boards that would control the computers. Well, he designed a system to control the lights on the tree, so we could actually spell letters across the front of the tree. I think the first system was very rudimentary and had switches and that kind of thing, and then he got into one that actually worked off of a controller for a printer, and he somehow got it to work. Ribbon cable was only supposed to go so far, and he strung it all the way across the sanctuary, and somehow it worked. And we ran on that one for, 6 or 8 years. And then he came up with a fancier system. That's where I kind of got involved in the lighting of the tree. But anyway, that's a story I can probably tell a little later on. Let you ask some more questions.
The image you can see here that we've got on the screen here, this is one of the earlier living Christmas trees. It started at Trinity Baptist Church in 1979 by one of my predecessors, Tommy Lyons, who was minister of music for a couple of decades. So this is one of the earlier ones. You can still see this is Trinity Baptist Church, our sanctuary prior to the 1986 renovation, or 1987 renovation. And then it got a lot bigger, right? When the space got bigger, it allowed the entire production to get bigger. And you can see that here, dramatically larger.
Yeah, the tree itself didn't change, but the set around it did.
Yeah.
We did a lot of work on that set. In fact, during Christmas tree building season, I had two jobs. I had my regular job, which was 8 hours a day.
Right.
Then I had my evening job, which was 4 or 5 hours a day, building this set. And I've got to give credit to Jim Ford. He was the one that actually designed the structure for the tree and got an engineer to certify it and design the structural steel. There's a round column that goes up the middle to hold up the main part of it. And there are angles that come in, and then had wooden, basically piers that went around the sides.
Yeah.
We would actually literally crawl into the tree, hiding behind the greenery, and then we'd pop up and sing. And we had different outfits we'd put on. We had multicolored aprons that we would wear, and they were on Velcro. And you pull a Velcro loose and come in, and it was silver. And you pull another Velcro loose, and it was red. So it was all sorts of crazy things happened to the tree.
Lots of planning
and
preparation. And so I think one of the things, every year they learned a different set of songs, right? There are a couple of things that repeated every year. The Hallelujah Chorus, which was always the big closing number of it. Jesus Paid It All, I think, was typically most of the time. But most of the music was different from year to year, which took a lot of preparation because it had to be memorized because the room is dark.
Well, the different trees had different themes.
Yeah.
I mean, one year we had a homeless theme. That wasn't a very colorful tree,
right?
because of the theme. But, I just had whatever the theme of the year was, we'd work the music around. And it was really something to be a part of this.
Yeah.
I think my wife doesn't miss it because we missed all the Christmas parties because we were busy working on the tree the whole time.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, we would start on the music in August, on the memorization, and it took that long to get the whole choir to memorize it.
Yeah.
And then when we get up right after Thanksgiving, we would pull out the choir loft, and then we'd put the tree up. There is, to this day, there's still a post down below the stage with, if you pull out the choir loft now, you can see the holes in the floor where you drop the bolts in to bolt in that steel column.
Which the choir loft is still modular to this day.
It is.
Because of that, of this long history of the living Christmas tree. Yeah, so the music being memorized for this, starting back in August, I've heard from several people that Babs Baugh and some others would help Tommy and get people together on Sunday afternoons to teach choreography to those who were out front of the living Christmas tree dancing, to spend time helping people learn and memorize lyrics and songs. And it was literally a full-time job for many people from August on, right? I mean,
pretty much, yeah. And even more interesting to me, I got my introduction to an ADAT. We did rehearsal recordings, and we'd divide into sections, and each section had a mic and would record onto the ADAT.
Yeah.
And if somebody messed up, that was kind of magic back then. You'd back up the tape, and you could record right over it and get it all just right. And then we'd send it out to the choir so you could listen to your part. Yeah. And it was really effective. It worked really well.
Yeah, it's amazing what could be done with what we would consider primitive technology in this day, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all the lighting and everything that's in there and the way that it was programmed to do that. I think it's really interesting to think about how many people this involved. So we said it started in 1979. That first year, there were 2 performances. They learned all this and put all this together. It wasn't nearly, as you saw, not nearly as elaborate in the late 70s, early 80s. It got much bigger, but started with 2 performances. The next year they moved to 4, and then the next year I think 5 or 6, ultimately topping out at 11, I think, performances at its height. And then by the end in 1999, back to 5 or 6, I believe. But it's just amazing how many people, I think at the peak, over 200 volunteers involved in just on stage, right?
It would be over 200, yeah. Because we'd have 100 in the tree, and then there was a cadre. I was usually on stage on the latter performances. There were probably 25 or 30 of us that were choir members on stage,
Yep.
but then we would have mainstream come in, we have children come in, we'd have guest artists come in. So we'd have over 200 come in.
Yeah, and that's not including the teams working behind the scenes.
That's right.
Many people overlapped, but there were many more. I know. So I went back into the church history archives and pulled the Trumpet is our newsletter that's been going since the 60s, a monthly newsletter. It used to be weekly at one point, but I pulled some of those from the 80s and 90s, and you can see in that first year, this is like August of 1979. They're talking about staffing committees that they needed to put on the Christmas tree, and they listed 22 teams for the first year. Everything from a coffee team for someone to make coffee before rehearsals and before performances, a team for bringing in food. And that isn't, and then you start talking about building the tree and lighting the tree and music prep and all those things. And that's all in addition to the staff leadership that was already working on it.
That's right, Jacob. Yeah. It was a big volunteer production.
Yeah.
That ran the gamut of different skills that people had to have to do these things.
Yeah.
It wasn't just performances. It was getting the thing put together and supporting the people who were putting it together.
Yeah. And it's amazing. And I think that's, I heard about the living Christmas tree. It wasn't something that I experienced growing up in Southern Kentucky. It wasn't prominent there like it is in some other parts of the country. But when I moved to Texas and before I started at Trinity, when I knew Trinity Baptist Church was looking and I was being talked to about coming as minister of music, and I would mention it to people, it's one of the first things I heard from people from other parts of the state, people who knew of the lore of the living Christmas tree at Trinity Baptist Church. And it's just amazing to think about the ability to just amass volunteers in that way. And I can't think of very many churches at any time in history that have had the ability to just pull together volunteers in the way that Trinity Baptist Church did in the 80s and 90s. It's a real testament to what God was doing through it and the way God was working through all the performances and the people who came, the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people who came to these performances. And it's also a testament to the great leadership of people like Tommy Lyons and Buckner Fanning and many other church staff. And then it's a testament to all the volunteers and the people who gave up nights with their kids at home, right? And the time I know you said you bowed out one year because you were working on an MBA, right? And just didn't have the time to do both. You had to choose one or the other.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't have time to learn the music because I was studying the whole time.
Yeah, and that's good of you. I'm glad you did that.
I actually came up and helped build the tree that year, though. In the little bit of time I did have. But
that's great. Do you have a favorite memory from all of that? I know it's probably hard because you did it for how many years?
Oh gosh, my first year that I sang was 1983, and then I did every tree except the year that I was doing the MBA.
Okay, so you did like 16 or 17 trees.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite memory from those years?
I've got dozens of favorite memories, but one that's really personal to me was watching my daughter. When she was 4 years old, she had a solo, and that was a really big deal. She sang "Happy Birthday, Jesus," and got to stand up front with Santa Claus and Buckner and Martha, and it was really fun to watch her. She had a good voice and she had a good ear, and she picked it up pretty quickly. But she was 4, and she would sing a performance, and then her friends would come up and they'd critique her. So the next performance would be a little different because of what they said. So it was kind of fun to watch that.
Yeah, that's one of the things. I went back the week before we were recording this. Lane had several copies of ones that were on VHS tape from the 90s that he transferred over to DVD. And I went back and watched a couple of them. And one of the things that I loved is that, yes, it is highly produced. Yes, it is lots of money was poured into putting this on, but yet it was still very authentic, and it was still there was still something homey about it, right? Like it wasn't just people who had spectacular voices who were performing. There were people of all different ages and stages who were doing that, and that's a really beautiful thing.
That's really true. We mixed it all up because we had the spectacular performers there,
and they're there, right? Yeah, you hear them,
but we also had just the run-of-the-mill singers that were up there supporting us, and it was amazing.
Yeah,
to see it all come together.
Was there a favorite theme out of those years that you had?
My favorite tree was probably the one, I can't remember the name of the theme, but they had a lot of youth come up on stage. They probably had 200 kids that are out there swing dancing to celebrating Jesus. That's what Christmas means to me.
Yeah.
And
I remember watching that exactly the moment you're talking about.
Yeah.
So it was either 91, 95, 97, or 98, because those are the ones I watched last week.
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting, and I wish we could chat with other people, with the hundreds of people who had been in the tree over the years, of favorite musical memories or memories otherwise, because I think we'd hear so many various stories.
A lot of those people are not with us anymore. A lot of them have graduated.
That's true.
And in fact, that's part of the reason why the tree was ended. Well, we got to the point, I was one of the younger people that worked on the tree.
Right.
There were too many people that had bypass operations and hip replacements, and they really couldn't get up and do that anymore.
Yeah. No, I've heard several people reflect on that as I've tried to figure out, why did this come to an end, right? It went on for so long, and who brought an end to it? And there's lots of different stories out there, right? Of people, from top-down leadership. But I think the more likely answer to me, and what seems to be right, is that it just became this consensus of, man, crawling into the tree is really, really hard for some of us who've been doing this for 20 years. And I think you can kind of see that as you watch the performances over the last couple of years. Things slow down a little bit. The sets aren't quite as elaborate, and all of that sort of thing. This feels like it's losing a little bit of steam in those last couple of years, but it's still wonderful, right? And still amazing. But it seems that everyone knew it was time to do something else, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I don't know that we've found the perfect replacement for it, right? And I don't know that there ever will be a perfect replacement for it. I think it's a really beautiful picture and window into a really unique season of life at Trinity Baptist Church.
Yeah.
And one that we can mourn the loss of, but one we can also really celebrate the amazing things that happened during that.
It was an amazing time and an amazing thing to be a part of. Even after the tree was over, I know one of the early concerts we had after the tree ended is how the reason why our choir loft looks the way it does now. The original choir loft went all the way down with Wanger risers, all the way down to the deck. And one Christmas we decided, well, it'd be nice to put up a wall and do some decoration, put some steps up both sides. And I actually built those steps.
Yeah.
And anyway, after we put them up, they decided they liked them and they left it. And I think the Wanger risers have been done away with. They used to be in the closet. And last time I looked, they weren't there
There's
anymore.
There's still some pieces, I think, laying around somewhere. But yeah, no, I think that's right. Like there's lots of good things came out of the end of this. But I think, if we were to talk about some funny stories from some of this.
Oh gosh.
I think one that if you look at the photo, it's very prominent, right? In the very bottom of the photo that's up there now, Tommy Lyons in his white tuxedo with the long coattails, right? Will you tell the story about how Tommy ended up with that?
Yeah, Tommy made some joke early on about how all he needed was a white set of tails to really make the part right. And somebody took him seriously and bought them for him.
Yeah.
And he had really been joking, but he felt like, gosh, I've got to wear these now. And so from then on,
every single year,
he had the white tails on every time we did a tree.
And with that, you can't make it out in the image. It's not clear enough, but has a baton with a light on it, right? It's battery operated.
That was very important because when they cut the lights out, you could not see
anything.
You couldn't see anything, but if he had that lighted baton, we could follow him.
Right. It's comical, but it's also necessary, right?
It worked really well.
Right.
It was one of those little maybe a low-tech thing, but
Right.
a tech thing nonetheless.
Yeah.
That made it possible for do what we did.
Absolutely. Are there any other funny stories you might have from years of putting it together?
Fairly early on, maybe 3 or 4 years in, we had a soloist that was in the middle of the tree, and he had a night where he just got sick, and he passed out right before his solo. And it got to the time for the solo, and all of a sudden, Tommy was looking up at him. He was there, but he wasn't singing.
Oh, my goodness.
And then he looked back up, and he was gone. Somebody pulled him down. But
part of that volunteer team
part
behind
of the volunteer
scenes,
team
right?
behind the scenes
Yeah.
grabbed him and pulled him down on ladders because he was kind of in the middle of the tree.
Goodness. Oh my goodness, I don't know what I would do. But so underneath the tree, there are people with fire extinguishers.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and otherwise, right? You can imagine what a fire hazard it might have
We
been.
had a health group down there, doctors and nurses that stayed under the tree, because people did get ill and have to be pulled down and things taken care of and that kind of thing.
Oh, my
Another
goodness.
funny incident, I was talking to Bill Wagner, who had designed the lighting controls, and I noticed everything was polarized. And I asked him, why is it polarized? And about that time, somebody leaned against a wire and it touched the metal part of the tree and it sparked and it went boom. He says, that's why. That part's not polarized.
Yeah.
We need to polarize the whole thing. So
So don't burn the church to the ground, right? That's a good goal. Yeah.
Well, and I remember volunteering one year to do the backgrounds, and I didn't know what I was getting into because Tommy was very creative, and sometimes the creativity didn't come in until the last minute. And I remember that year we did an all-nighter and finished about 5 a.m.
Yeah.
And the first tree was that Sunday afternoon, so I went and changed into my church clothes and
Wow.
went to church. Then we came back that afternoon and did the first morning. I slept it all.
Wow.
And at the end of that day, I said, I think I need to find another job. I'm not cut out for these all-nighters, so I volunteered to be in charge of putting the lights on the tree.
Yeah.
So that became my job from there on out. And the first year I did it, we were still using live greenery.
Yeah.
And you had to put the live greenery on, and then you had to spray it with a fire retardant and let it dry, and then come back the next day and start putting the lights on. And the lights were basically 1.5 feet wide by 2 feet deep, and
Right.
and a pattern, and it had red, white, blue, and amber, and mini. And they, the controller would do different patterns, and we could actually spell letters across the front of the tree. It was just amazing what it could do, and all sorts of runs up and runs down and spirals and really fun things to do with lights. But anyway, it took about a week and a half to get it all on, and then it was really a rush to get ready to do the first performance at that point. Well, the next year I said, okay, it's time to go with artificial greenery. So I ordered in some of that orange netting, except I got it ordered in a forest green, and we spent the summer cutting it up into panels that were 1.5 feet by 2 feet long, and then putting the artificial greenery on, and then we put the lights on the panel, and then behind the panel we had a little circuit board. And that's another thing. There was another group that sat down in the basement soldering on the other components of the circuit board and finishing them off. And so, but once we got that built, I got a hold of Mainstream, which was the youth choir, said, okay, it's time to put these on the tree. We have Velcro straps. And Mainstream got up, and in 45 minutes, we had the whole tree covered, and the lights were in the right place.
It's pretty amazing.
Now, it took another 2 to 3 days for the guys to connect them up and get them lit. But, boy, it cut the time down tremendously. So that was a real time saver. So anyway, my job became easy after that year.
Yeah. My goodness. Well, thank you, Lane, for sharing about your history with the tree and your expertise in putting it together. And we've got more conversations like this coming about the living Christmas tree. And I hope that as people join us for the 75th anniversary celebration, which we're doing on June 29th and 30th, that's Saturday evening and Sunday morning, that people will come ready to share their stories like this. I think we're going to try to record some of those as a part of that weekend, because as you said, there are some people who are no longer with us who we'd love to hear their stories. And so we want to be able to tell the stories of how God has moved at Trinity Baptist Church and in the lives of his people over the last 75 years. And so we hope that you'll come ready for that. It's been a pleasure, Lane. Thanks for listening in to our fireside chats conversation today. There will be many more of these. We hope that you'll find them on YouTube or any other podcast platform. Like and subscribe to those, and let us know what you think about it. If you've got a way that you were ministered to by the living Christmas tree or participated in it, we'd love for you to share that in the comments on those videos. That would mean a lot to hear from you, and we hope you'll join us for the rest of these conversations.